What is up, loyal lads and ladies? My name is Midnight Wolf, and welcome to another episode of the Wolf on the Field show. In today's episode, we're going to be reacting to the top 25 teams on the AP poll, as well as I'm going to take a look at the undefeated teams that are left in the 2023 college football season. And then we're going to also dive into my top 10 list on where I think teams should be ranked post week 7 and going into week 8. So now this is a take 2 episode. For some reason my stream died on me, so I did get pretty far in the rankings, but I'm really wanting all of this stuff to be on the same video, so I'm gonna try to, hopefully we'll make it through this time without any crashes. That is at least the goal. And let me turn down the volume just a little bit on the music. All right, so yeah, without further ado, we'll just kind of restart so that way it's all in the same video and I don't have to go back and re-edit everything. Hopefully we can make it through without any more crashes. So yeah, we're just gonna start from the very get-go. And I'm gonna kind of reference my phone to get my notes for each team, and hopefully, looks like my video quality kind of went down a little bit. So coming at number 25, we have UCLA. So they're kind of one of those teams where I don't know how I feel about them just yet. They handled Washington State very well a couple weeks back, and that was a very awesome win for them. But then you go back a week before that, they lost to Utah, and then of course this past weekend they lost to Oregon State. So they've seemed to have been kind of up, like on the up and up, but in terms of their performance this last weekend, they definitely have knocked themselves out of the playoff conversation. I know that Joel Klatt was kind of thinking that UCLA would be kind of like a dark horse, or a team that might fly under the radar as a potential candidate, and they unfortunately have failed that test in losing to Oregon State. So I think that they're kind of knocked out of the playoff conversation. Now, that being said, I do have a problem with them still being in the top 25 with 2 losses. And here's kind of why. We have 2 other undefeated teams, and I'll go more in depth about the undefeated teams here in just a little bit when I finish the AP poll. But we have 2 more undefeated teams that have every right to be in the top 25. Now, I'm not going to say that they're the best team in the nation right now, but they should at least be on the top 25 list. Not, like, at least 24 and 25 in James Madison and Liberty. It really annoys me whenever I see like a 2-loss team on the top 25 when there are some other teams that are undefeated that, in my opinion, are more deserving of a top 25 spot. Until, like, I mean, I think that means that they're bowl eligible. They're 6-0. And they're bowl eligible at this point. They should be in the top 25. That being said, I get it, they're in the group of 5 school, but we'll get to that here in just a little bit when we talk about undefeated teams. But right now, let's get to Iowa. Iowa's another one of those that, I mean, they've been pretty consistent. They're winning their games. However, they don't really have much of an offense. Like, their best offensive game is against Western Michigan, and they got shut out by Penn State, number 7 on the AP poll. And so I'm not too impressed with Iowa. Once again, like, Iowa and even Tulane, I'm just not too impressed with what they've done and what they've accomplished, and the fact that each one of those teams has at least 1 loss or more. It really bothers me that there are undefeated teams that are not on here. So I do have a problem with that, but you know what? Hopefully, if those other undefeated teams continue to win, that the media and hopefully even the college football playoff committee will see that and give them a little bit more respect, the respect that they deserve. I get it, they're just a group of 5 school, but once again, you go undefeated, that, or, at least up to this point, that should be well rewarded. And if you lose, then you get exposed, and then we'll take them out of the top 25. But until then, they deserve a spot over these other teams. I like where Air Force is at. I would probably put them a little bit higher. I'd probably put Air Force above LSU, maybe even above USC. I think that you should really reward undefeated teams, and the fact that you have like a bunch of 1 to 2 lost teams ahead of an undefeated team really kind of bothers me, especially with an Air Force team that is, they're not the most respected team in the world, but they're a battle ready team. Like, they have proven that they can win ball games and do so pretty convincingly too. I just really would love for Air Force to get a little bit more respect, because they beat a pretty decent Wyoming team, one that gave Texas some fits early on in the season, and so I really like Air Force, and I really think that they need to be a little bit more respected, but I'm just happy to at least see them on the top 25, and 22 is not a bad rank. At least in the middle point of the season. Now, if they keep going undefeated, I would love to see them make it in the top 15, maybe even higher. So that's kind of where they're at for now. Hopefully they continue to improve themselves. But once again, like Louisville, they kind of let me down this week. I kind of was getting on the Louisville bandwagon when they completely dominated Notre Dame. It was a great game for Louisville. They were incredible against Notre Dame, but unfortunately that win kind of got tainted with the loss to Pittsburgh, a kind of mediocre to bad Pittsburgh team. That completely negates the hype that surrounds the win against Notre Dame. And that being said, probably my biggest gripe in that regards is the fact that even though they lost to Pittsburgh, but now Notre Dame is 15 and Duke is 16, where Louisville beat Notre Dame and Notre Dame beat Duke. So I feel like 15, 16, 18, and 21 are kind of out of order. I would definitely knock Notre Dame down. I would knock Duke down further. And I would have those just behind Louisville, because Louisville actually beat them. Yeah, they lost to Pittsburgh, but what does that say about Notre Dame and Duke? That they're not as good as what people think. Same with USC. And that's honestly, and we'll get to USC and the how that compares to Notre Dame here in just a little bit, and probably why that bolsters Notre Dame's win a little bit too much. But yeah, well, let's move on to Missouri. Missouri, their only loss is LSU, which at least they got that order right. But Missouri is kind of one of those teams that they kind of can take control over their destiny. They have to go and they have to go and play Georgia, number 1 team in the nation. They also have to go and play Tennessee right after that. And if Missouri can somehow miraculously beat Georgia, that would be probably one of the biggest upsets of the year. And that would give Missouri some control over their destiny in the season. They could find themselves in the playoff conversation if they could make that happen. Do I think that will happen? Probably not, but there is a path to the playoffs for Missouri if they take control over that. And their one loss to LSU was pretty close loss. They only lost by 10 points, so they very well could not necessarily avenge that loss, but kind of almost erase it with a win against Georgia. So I don't know. I kind of am liking Missouri. I think that they're a pretty solid football team. I don't think that they're loss to LSU will really define them unless they start losing more games, and then it will probably define them at that point. But that being said, LSU, they're not that great. They're great, but they're not that great at the same time. It's kind of a weird situation with LSU because their two losses are to Florida State and to Ole Miss, but it's because of that defense. Their defense, they're kind of in the same boat as USC. Their defense kind of sucks, and in order to win championships, you got to have a good defense, and that's kind of why I think LSU kind of is out of the picture. Even if Missouri miraculously beats Georgia, like, that's kind of one of those weird situations where I would kind of justify the head-to-head matchup being out of order, but it'd be hard. It's still, I hate whenever you have head-to-head matchups and you have teams ahead of the other one. It would definitely make LSU's win over Missouri look a little bit more impressive, and so I probably would have LSU go up a little bit higher in that scenario. But once again, Missouri has to miraculously beat Georgia for that to even take place. But I would probably have Air Force ahead of LSU at the very least, and keep those teams lowered in the top 25. But that's just me. Moving on to USC, and this is the one that gets me. I'm definitely a Sooner fan, so I kind of love seeing this team kind of fail, and failed pretty badly too, mind you. Like, and I think this is the game that exposed USC, USC versus Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame has been rated, and I think that USC was highly overrated to begin with. It's like their first half of the season, they haven't really proven themselves, and Colorado, they kind of fizzled out there. So that win is looking a lot less impressive, but their defense is what is their Achilles heel, along with their offensive line. So USC is not that good of a team. They're just not. Literally, their quarterback, Caleb Williams, is who bails them out. And if he has a bad game, which he did against Notre Dame, you're going to suffer and you're going to win, or you're going to lose a lot of games. And honestly, like, I would not be surprised if, like, every team that they play going forward has the capacity to beat them. Like, USC is going to have to earn the rest of their wins if they're even going to get another win. So I'm sorry, USC, but I think the worst is yet to come for you guys in this season. I don't think that you guys are good, and honestly, that is why we probably see Notre Dame at 15. Because of how highly ranked USC was to begin with, it kind of makes that win for Notre Dame look a lot better than what it probably is going to end up being. I mean, I think that USC is easily going to be losing at least 4 to 5 more games easily. I think that Washington is a much better football team. I think that Oregon is a much better football team. I think even California could possibly beat them, and Utah. So I'm sorry, USC, but you guys, I think that you guys are in a terrible position right now, where you're at, and I think that 18 is kind of gracious in my opinion. I would hate to project forward too much in terms of how I would view somebody, because they could very well prove me wrong and win the rest of their games. But I just don't see it happening, and I could be eating my words at the end of the season with this, but I definitely think that they're going to have a pretty bad season for the rest of the year. And that is why I personally wouldn't have them in the top 25. I think that was just one of those games that exposed them, and they're going to struggle the rest of the way out. So I don't think that was good for them, and that is why I would definitely have Air Force even ahead of Notre Dame or Duke. Not necessarily that highly ranked, but I think that Notre Dame and Duke should definitely be behind Louisville, and Air Force should be ahead of like LSU even. So that probably looks to be about rank 18 or 17 in that area. That's probably where I'd put Air Force, and then all those other teams behind Air Force. So that's kind of where I have probably the biggest issue on this entire list is right there, because like once again I think that Notre Dame, USC, and maybe even Duke now that, I mean, their loss against Notre Dame is starting to look a little worse if Notre Dame keeps losing. But it looks a little better at the same time with the win against USC. But once again, if USC keeps losing, then that makes the Notre Dame's win look less and less, appealing. And so it's just going to kind of spiral, or, snowball. It's going to be a huge snowball effect, I think, and make Duke's win Duke's loss a lot worse as the season progresses in that regards. However, Duke will have opportunities to kind of make themselves look better. Like, let's see, who does Duke play? Duke, they play, so like they're playing Florida State this week, so they have an opportunity to upset the number 4 team in the nation as far as the AP's concerned. So Duke is kind of one of those where, yes, their loss against Notre Dame could progressively get worse and worse, but their win against Florida State, if that happens, could kind of make up for that. So Duke is kind of in a weird situation where I don't think that they're good enough to really control their destiny completely. However, with a win against Florida State would definitely help, but I think that they would have to have a lot of help from other teams, because I think if Florida State lost this week, I don't think Duke would take their spot. I think that probably either Oklahoma or Washington would probably take that spot, depending on how they do these next couple of weeks. And so if that does happen, now it could be that Florida State beats Duke, and then Duke would be probably out of the playoff conversation altogether. But Duke has an opportunity to at least not necessarily take control of their destiny, but steer their destiny in the right direction. And then they would have to have a little bit of help, I think, to find themselves into the playoff conversation. That being said, I did skip Tennessee, but that's because we were kind of talking about the whole Notre Dame, Duke, USC, and Louisville situation. Tennessee is kind of a weird one. I don't really know how I feel about Tennessee. They haven't really done that great, and their loss against Florida is kind of one of those that is progressively getting worse and worse as the season goes on. However, they are still winning their games, and they beat Texas A&M, which, I mean, I'm not really too excited about that win myself. I'm just not a big fan of A&M. I don't think that they're that great of a football team. They did beat South Carolina, who did give Georgia some problems earlier on in the season, so I will give them some respect there. I think they even played them probably to about the same win margin or close to it that Georgia did. So I think that is good for Tennessee in that regards, if you wanted to kind of talk about common opponents in that. But yeah, that loss against Florida, it continuously makes them look a little worse, unfortunately. It really stinks that they couldn't figure out how to beat Florida, because they would be definitely in the playoff conversation probably this week, after beating South Carolina and Texas A&M. But unfortunately, that's not the case for them. And so I mean, Tennessee, they will definitely need a lot of help to take control over their own destiny, I think. However, they do have a big game coming up with Alabama, so they could very well beat Alabama. I think Alabama is a beatable team this year. I don't think that they're that elite, and so I think that Tennessee can take a little bit more control over their destiny. Still will need a lot of help to find themselves back in the playoff conversation. But if they can beat Alabama and possibly even win out, I mean, they also have to play Georgia. So if they can beat Alabama and they can beat Georgia even, like that would be probably enough to put them back into control of their own destiny. But that is going to be quite the feat to do. That'll be very difficult to beat Alabama and Georgia in the same year. So I mean, I hope that happens, but we'll have to just wait and see with them. But that is a potential situation that kind of sparks some chaos in college football if Tennessee can kind of run the table there. So it'd be interesting to see what they do, but I don't see it happening, but it could. So we'll just have to once again wait and see. And we already talked about Duke. We already talked about Notre Dame. I'm not too thrilled with those teams, really. I think that there is opportunity for Duke to take control and have a little bit of help, but I just don't think that they will. I think that Florida State's probably going to be the better football team, and I think that Florida State will beat them. Maybe a close game, but we'll see. Notre Dame, once again, they have 2 losses, and once again, I know it's 2 losses to higher opponents, but on the AP poll, but it's one of those things where you have 2 losses. It's going to be really, really hard to find yourself back in any kind of playoff conversation with 2 losses. You would have to have a lot of help, like a ton of help from the rest of the college football landscape. So yeah, 15 is way too gracious for them, and the only reason they're that high in the AP is because of their win against USC, which I think is going to get worse and worse as the season progresses. Utah is another kind of weird one. I don't know how I feel about them just yet. They did handle California very well this past weekend, but they lost against Oregon State a few weeks ago. And Oregon State lost to Washington State, I believe. Let me verify that real quick. I just want to make sure I get all my facts correct. They lost to Washington State. Excuse me. And so it's kind of one of those things where I think we're going to start to see the Pac-12 really hurt themselves. That's early signs of that, where you have one team beat another team who beats another team, and then that team beats that first team, and so that we're kind of starting to see the Pac-12 kind of, I guess people have used the term cannibalize themselves. Maybe that's a good terminology for that, but Utah and Oregon State, they're gonna have to avenge their losses by beating USC, by beating Utah, or by beating Oregon, rather, my bad, and Washington, to really get themselves back in the playoff conversation as far as I'm concerned. Now, if they can do that, if Utah and or Oregon State could do that, they can find themselves back in the conversation, but their one loss, unfortunately, is going to hinder them until that happens. And honestly, personally, I don't think they'll be any one of those 2 teams will be Oregon or even Washington. To me, I think that those are the best 2 Pac-12 teams in the nation. But that's just my opinion. Obviously, this sport is played on the field, so we'll see what happens. But from what I've seen, I think that Washington and Oregon are the 2 best Pac-12 teams, and I think that the only teams that will beat those 2 teams are those teams themselves. So we'll see what happens. So I already talked about Oregon State. I did skip Ole Miss. Mississippi, I mean, pretty solid win against Arkansas. Arkansas has kind of been one of those weird teams that if they could just get over a specific hump, that one possession loss that they've kind of had all season long. I don't know if every one of their games has been a one possession loss, but it's been, I know they've lost a lot of close games, and so they're kind of one of those, if they could just finish their games, they could have easily been an undefeated team if they could have just finished their games. And so unfortunately that kind of makes the Mississippi win over them not as impressive, but they did beat LSU a few weeks back, and LSU, at least as far as the AP poll is concerned, is ranked 19, so that's not a bad win. That's actually a really decent win, and if you want to look at it from a rankings perspective. But then they have that loss to Alabama, and I think that Alabama is not as good as the Alabama of the recent memory. So I think that Alabama is super beatable right now. I mean, Texas was able to get it done, and several other schools have gotten close, and so including USF. So even what people would consider an inferior opponent was able to give Alabama problems. So I think that, you know, if you're in the SEC, if you want to beat Alabama, this is the year to do it. They are ready to be beaten. You just got to finish your game and go in there and take it from them. So, like, I look at you, Tennessee, you have the opportunity to do so. And I think, does Missouri play them? Maybe not. I know I already talked about Missouri, but I'm already, like, forgetting. Okay, they don't play Missouri, so, but they do, kind of, let me look at their schedule real quick. I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but even Auburn has an opportunity. Auburn played Georgia really well. I think Auburn is probably another one of those teams that is maybe better than what their schedule or what their record shows. I mean, and I think that Auburn could possibly upset Alabama this year, especially with it being at Auburn. I know I'm getting ahead of myself with this one, but I mean, I think that Alabama is a beatable team this year, and it sucks that Mississippi couldn't get the job done. And so that's, I mean, naturally you find yourself behind them, but they're a one-loss team to the number 11 team. So Ole Miss is a pretty solid football team, and you know they have they have the capacity, if they can win out, which they do play Georgia. Another opportunity for Georgia to lose. They could easily take control of their destiny. They just have to get over that hump of Georgia and then win the rest of their games. So Mississippi could be one of those SEC teams that people are sleeping on. I think that they have the capacity to take possession of their own destiny. And then you have, let's see. So I did already kind of talk about Alabama, but once again, I think Alabama is a team to beat this year. I think that they are just not as good as years prior. And once again, I think that I personally think that Alabama will at least lose 2 more games at a minimum. I'm probably going to get a lot of flack for that one, but I don't see Alabama getting past certain games. So I'm fine, I guess, with having a one-loss Alabama at 11. However, I do think that there are probably more deserving teams that should be ahead of them, and they are unfortunately not because of how sluggish Alabama has been the last several weeks. But I don't know. We'll see what happens. It'll iron itself out soon enough with Alabama. Coming at your AP top 10 with North Carolina, I'm actually very happy to see North Carolina break the top 10 this week. I think that they are deserving of that because they are an undefeated team. And once again, if you know me, you know that I love undefeated teams, and I reward them probably a lot more than what a lot of other people do, including the group of 5 undefeated teams. But North Carolina, they're in control of their destiny. And they don't have to play Florida State until the ACC championship game if both teams make it to that point. So all they have to do is win out, and they control their destiny. So, and if they, if you're an undefeated ACC team who wins your conference championship game, there's a good chance you're going to make it in. Now, there could be a situation where they do have to take both teams or two undefeated teams from two different conferences and kind of weigh who has the better resume. That could be a factor if certain teams or if certain conferences have teams that go undefeated, but we'll get into that here in just a little bit when we talk about the undefeated teams. Oregon. So I have to admit, I was wrong about Oregon, but not really. Like, I was wrong, but I wasn't wrong. I thought it really, the game against Washington could have gone either way. I just kind of felt like Oregon was the better team, but Washington kind of proved that they might actually be the better team in the Pac-12. So ultimately, the one who got the job done, and they are the one that gets to be in the top 5, and the other one has to be in the top 9, which is still a manageable spot. I mean, you could easily find yourself back into the playoff conversation if you win the rest of your games. So Oregon, I mean, even though that they have one loss, they are in control of their destiny, and they have the capability of making the playoffs if they just continue to win. But same with Washington, they are in control of their destiny. They just have to win out, and they will be in the playoffs no matter what. But I'm okay with Oregon being at 9. I would put North Carolina in with the undefeateds though. Like, I would probably move North Carolina up to 8 and put Texas and Oregon at 9 and 10. Honestly, I don't even remember what I did on my top 10 now, but we'll get to that later on. I might have actually put them behind Texas, but I want to say I put North Carolina ahead of Texas, but we'll get to that later. So, yeah. So Texas, I mean, this is kind of where I'm starting to have a little bit more of problems, and it wouldn't be that big of a deal had another situation happened, like higher up in the rankings, with Oklahoma, and we'll get to that here in just a little bit. But Texas had a bye week this week, and so naturally, like, they shouldn't be penalized for having a bye week or rewarded, but in this case they kind of were rewarded. I think they went up 1 to 2 spots, but oh well. I don't have a problem with that if you adequately reward another team that had a bye week this week, who seemingly got penalized for having a bye week, which seems to always happen to this particular team anytime they are doing well and have a bye week. So, but we'll get to them in here just a little bit. Penn State, I think 7 is a good spot for them. Honestly, like, I wouldn't personally put them there, but I think that is a solid spot for them for now, just because they are undefeated, and they, I mean, they will have every opportunity to prove themselves to be a top 4 team. So they're going to be playing Ohio State this next week. So Penn State, I mean, you kind of control your own destiny at this point. You have to win against Ohio State, and you have to win against Michigan, and you'll be in the playoffs. So I like having Penn State anywhere from 7 to 10. I think that's a great spot for them to be in. So not too concerned about them. But then I get to Oklahoma and the order at which they put Oklahoma and Washington. This is kind of an issue that I have, and it doesn't truly matter, because at the end of the day, both teams kind of control their destiny. Both of those teams have teams ahead of them that very could easily lose a game, and two of those teams have to lose at least one game. Michigan and Ohio State have to play each other, so at least that will get ironed out. However, there could be a situation where we have to pick between 5 undefeated conference teams, and it becomes an issue of, okay, which conference has the stronger resume, and that's going to be a little nerve-wracking to see if that does in fact happen. Hopefully things will get ironed out a little bit more clearer, but Oklahoma, it's kind of funny. So like, let's kind of paint this picture here. Oklahoma last week, they beat what was formerly the number 3 team in Texas. Now they're 8, but they were 3. Oklahoma was a little bit further down in the rankings than Washington was at number 12, but they beat the number 3 team and were placed at number 5. Washington, who was already ranked ahead of Oregon, who was a home game, they win in Oklahoma's bye week and jumps Oklahoma to take the number 5 spot from them. And not to mention the fact that they put Oklahoma's win at number 8 and they put Washington's win at number 9. So they are saying that Oklahoma has the better win than Washington, yet Washington somehow gets the edge. And Oklahoma, I think, Oklahoma beat Texas by 4 points, right? Yeah, 4 points. Washington only beat Oregon by 3 points. So Oklahoma had a better win margin than Oregon, or than Washington over Oregon. Also, Oklahoma and Washington has a common opponent in Tulsa. And let me bring that up for real quick. Oklahoma. Oklahoma beat Tulsa 66-17. Okay. A few weeks prior to that, Washington only beat Tulsa 43-10. So Washington's defense did slightly better than Oklahoma, but Oklahoma's offense did way better than Washington's. So say what you will, but I personally think that Oklahoma has the better resume. Not to say it's much better than Washington's. I mean, Washington in ahead. I would love to see Oklahoma and Washington play for a national championship game. And that I might get to that here in just a little bit. In terms of possible scenarios, I think Oklahoma and Washington are evenly matched. I think that they could very well have one of those amazing playoff games that could go either way. So I would really like to see Oklahoma play Washington in the playoffs, and hopefully even the national championship game. So we'll see what that entails here in just a little bit. But yeah, that's kind of my big issue, though, is having Washington jump Oklahoma. I just don't know if there's enough to really justify that, just because I think that really either one of those teams could be interchangeable. But at the end of the day, Michigan and Ohio State have to play each other, so that at least there will be one more playoff spot available at that point, guaranteed, if these other teams go undefeated, of course. So I don't know, we'll see. It will probably work itself out, but I really hope that it's a clearer picture by the end of it. Like maybe even Georgia could lose a game, possibly. That would make things a whole lot more clear, because then we would have a potential of just 4 Power 5 conference teams making it to the playoffs and not having to deal with a 5th one. But that there is a scenario where that could happen. So anyways, let's move on to Florida State. Florida State, they keep getting the job done. Once again, I would honestly put Washington and Oklahoma over Florida State, if you ask me. But Florida State, they continue to do get the job done, and they will have an opportunity to kind of reprove themselves against Duke, because everybody has been kind of questionable on whether or not Florida State could really handle themselves. They did really well against Syracuse. That's a great quality win for them. But if they can beat Duke and do it pretty convincingly, then they will probably solidify a much clearer spot in the top 4. But they do have to possibly play North Carolina in the ACC championship game. So we'll have to just wait and see if those two teams can remain undefeated. So that could possibly iron itself out as well, to where, okay, maybe it will be a Georgia and winner of the Big Ten, and Washington and Oklahoma, somewhere, not necessarily in that order, but it could be that scenario. And then we don't have to worry about the ACC, because they would have one loss. So there's a scenario there. So Ohio State, I personally think that they're a better team than Michigan, at least based off of the resume. Michigan, yes, they have shown that they can be a pretty consistent team for the most part. However, I just cannot get over their schedule. I really can't. I just, people have their or they have their opinions about Oklahoma and like, who have they played? Well, you can't really say that anymore because they play the number 8 team in the nation, as far as the AP poll is concerned, and beat them. They had pretty much control over the entire game, other than a couple of spots in that game. But everybody's whole argument for Oklahoma not being in the playoff spots is because of their strength of schedule. Well, who has Michigan played? So until Michigan plays somebody, I would keep them out of the top 4. I would probably put Michigan at number 6, because I think that there are more deserving teams that deserve that spot until Michigan can prove themselves. Now, they would have the opportunity to play Penn State and beat them, and then play Ohio State and beat them. And if they did that, and then also won their Big Ten championship, I don't have a problem with them being at number 2 at that point. But until then, I don't like seeing 2 Big Ten schools in the top 4 spots when there's already limited playoff spots as is. And you have other Power 5 schools that are capable, at least currently in this season, to be in a playoff position. And it really irritates me seeing Oklahoma as far down as 6. Like, I probably wouldn't be as upset about Washington jumping Oklahoma if either Michigan or Ohio State was behind Oklahoma. Because I personally, and you'll see that in my top 10, I have a team from each Power 5 school, the leader of each Power 5 school, in the top 5 spots. And I think that's how it should be, at least in the midseason, until teams start losing their games. But we'll get to that here in just a little bit. So that's Ohio State and Michigan. I mean, they're doing they're getting the job done. They're 6-0 and 7-0. And it's crazy because I think Michigan has another game next week, so they don't have a bye until they're possibly 8-0 or 7-1, depending on how that game goes. So it's crazy how far into the season they're going to go without a bye week. So they'll be like the first team to possibly be 8-0 after next week, and maybe even Georgia too. So that'll be fascinating to see. And then you have Georgia, and I don't think Georgia's the number 1 team in the nation. They have not been consistent enough to be in that spot. I do think that spot is up for grabs really from any of the Power 5 schools. You could probably insert any Power 5 school in that spot and have a justification, and that it does include Georgia. But once again, like Kentucky, they lost this last week, so it makes Georgia's win against them a little bit less impressive, even though they did dominate that game. And then you also have been just struggling all year long. They've just not looked like the dominant Georgia team that we've come to know and appreciate. And so I don't see Georgia being number one. However, AP poll sees something in them that I don't, and that's fine, as long as other teams that are Power 5 schools that are undefeated gets an opportunity to be in the playoffs to prove themselves. I don't have a problem with where Georgia's at. I would probably put Georgia somewhere at like 3 or 4 right now, just because I don't think that they're the number one team until they prove to me otherwise. I would not put them at number one myself, but they are the reigning national champs, and so that's the only merit they really have. That's the only thing that they have to go off of. But once again, I'm under the idea that previous seasons aren't supposed to matter, that what matters is the current season. And so you're like everything is supposed to be out the window in previous seasons. You're only supposed to rank teams based on what they're doing this year. And what I'm seeing with Georgia is not the number one team in the nation. It's not. But that's okay. As long as they're, if they're undefeated, I don't have a problem with them being in any one of those top 4 spots, because they have an opportunity to prove that they're number one again. But I don't think that they are based on their performance, so that's why I have a problem with them being at number one. I just, I would definitely rather see Ohio State be number one right now than Georgia. And definitely not Michigan, because once again, I just don't think that they've played anybody yet until they play Penn State or Ohio State. So until that happens, I just don't have any respect for Michigan. So that's why I think the number one spot is up for grabs. But you can literally have a justification for any Power 5 undefeated school be in that number one spot. But anyways, that is the AP poll reaction. It kind of was a long one, so I do apologize. So we're gonna quickly transition to the next segment. But if that's all you came for was the AP poll reaction, I do appreciate you taking the time out of your day to kind of see how a random fan of the college football sport views the AP poll. And I know this kind of poll doesn't truly matter, but it does matter at the same time. If you catch my drift there, it may not be the true official poll for the national playoffs, but because of the eye test situation of how the playoff committee ranks their teams, what other way are they exercising the eye test metric other than how the national media views these teams? I mean, that's the only way I can see them doing the eye test. And so with that being a metric to determining who's going to be in the 4 playoff spots, I want the AP poll to be as accurate as possible. And it's hard to do that when you have a preseason poll affect the current polls, because the preseason overinflates teams that shouldn't be, like USC, for example. I definitely think that they're going to lose a lot more games, and because of that helps Notre Dame have a better quality win, and that's what keeps Notre Dame in the top 15. And so it kind of all snowballs at that point, and inflates teams that shouldn't be inflated and deflates teams that shouldn't be deflated. So all right, that's it for the AP poll. And once again, if you just came for that, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys enjoyed that. And my next video will probably be a Oklahoma versus UCF preview. So definitely come for that video if you like this kind of stuff. And I will see you guys in the next one. So moving on to the next segment, I did want to go briefly into the remaining undefeated teams in college football in the 2023 season. So in the ACC, you have Florida State and North Carolina. In the Big 12, you have Oklahoma. In the Big 10, you have Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State. In the Conference USA, you have Liberty. In Mountain West, you have Air Force. In Pac-12, you have Washington. SEC, you have Georgia. And Sunbelt, you have James Madison. So I don't really know where to really start here. So I guess I can start with the group of 5 schools. And this is why this is one of my biggest gripes about the AP poll currently is you have, yes, they are a group of 5 schools. But you have 3 group of 5 schools that have undefeated teams, or 3 group of 5 conferences that has teams that are undefeated. Now, that's probably a better way of wording that. And one of them is on the top 25. They're actually number 22 currently, and that is Air Force. So congrats to Air Force for being a top 25 team. However, I really feel bad for teams like Liberty in the Conference USA, and as far as the Sun Belt's concerned, James Madison. I get it, they're group of 5 schools, but they're undefeated, and there are teams in the top 25 that have 2 or 1 to 2 losses. And I think that that's not really fair to these other teams. And before you get, well, do you think that these teams, if they were to play a Georgia or if they were to play a Michigan or Ohio State, that they would really beat them? I think it's possible. I think that any team on any given day, if they play the calls right and execute the plays well, they could beat any team. I don't care if you're the 133rd team in the nation. You could beat just about anybody if the conditions are right. You definitely would need a lot of help. A lot of things go your way. But I think it's possible. But that being said, if you don't give them the opportunity to prove themselves, like if the other Power 5 schools go on, if all 5 have teams that go undefeated, I think that they would get first dibs in the playoff conversation. But to leave these other group of 5 schools out, if those other teams get a loss, maybe even 2 losses, I feel like that would be a huge disrespect to teams like Liberty, James Madison, and even Air Force if they continue to not give them the respect that they deserve. Because otherwise, why are they even in this league? Why, like, if we're not, they are a part of the 133 teams of college football at this level of play. Why then are they even a part of the NCAA football team lineup? Why have them even there to begin with? Like, if I was the director of any of these power or group of 5 schools, or a group of 5 not schools but group of 5 conferences, I would probably petition with the other conferences in the group of 5 level of football and say, hey, let's make our own league. Let's leave this league because it's not fair. It doesn't it only caters to the Power 5 schools. I mean, it is very rare for a group of 5 school to be even in the playoff conversation. And I'm looking at you, Cincinnati, back when you were just a group of 5 school. I felt that the amount of disrespect that Cincinnati you got that year was massive, and it's so unfair for the teams that they don't have any control over their schedule, yet are left out of the conversation because they're a group of 5 school and not a Power 5 school. That's just not very fair. And so that's why if it was me, if I was the director of any of these conferences, I would probably petition with the rest of the group of 5 and be like, hey, let's separate and form our own league so that we can have a national champion. Because that, if you go undefeated, you should be rewarded for that. You like, that's hard to do for any level of college football. To go 12 weeks perfectly is very difficult to do. And then you have to throw in conference play, or conference championships, then the playoffs. That's hard to do. But at least they made it. Now, granted, next year the group of 5 schools might have a bigger chance with the expansion, with the playoff expansion. But that sucks that we have to expand the playoffs for teams like Air Force or James Madison or Liberty get a chance. It sucks that we have to expand the playoffs for them to get a chance. And I've heard talks that even then they wouldn't have a bid to go to the playoffs. And I think that's ridiculous because they would be undefeated. Like if the playoffs happened today, these teams would be undefeated. And they'd be left out. At least 2 of them. And even technically Air Force, since they're only ranked 22. That's not fair. And that's why I would definitely consider leaving I would consider starting a new league if I were these other conferences. So that's my 2 cents on the whole matter between Conference USA undefeated team, Mountain West undefeated team, and James Madison. More so Conference USA and Sunbelt, because at least Mountain West Air Force is getting some love. But yeah, I feel bad for these other 2 teams. So that's the group of 5 schools. Now kind of the other teams that kind of has control over their destiny at this point. And kind of the road to the playoffs is pretty simple for a lot of these teams. And then of course you have the Big Ten, who, I mean, they might play themselves out of the playoff conversation, depending on how that goes. But you have SEC, Georgia. So, I mean, if they continue to do what they do, then they're in. So, I mean, there's not much more you can say about them. But they do have some tough opponents coming up. I mean, they do have to play Tennessee and Missouri. So, any one of those teams could give Georgia some problems. And so, it's not like Georgia can just, sleepwalk into the playoffs. They're going to have to actually show up for those 2 games, and they very well could. And then they would seal a spot in the playoff spot. Pac-12, Washington. To me personally, it was either a toss-up between Washington and Oregon, who I thought was going to be the one to run the table, and now it's looking like it might be Washington. Now that being said, Washington doesn't have an easy schedule by any means. They're going to have to continue to earn their spot, or they could easily find themselves losing. I mean, Oregon State could possibly beat them. Utah could possibly beat them at some point. And then if Oregon sees them again in the Pac-12 Pac-12 championship game, Oregon could steal that spot back as the number 1 team in the Pac-12. But for now, Washington, they have full control over their destiny at this point. So, and their toughest game, arguably, Oregon, they won. So if they continue to win their games and win out, they're good, and they'll easily find themselves in a playoff spot. Now the Big Ten. Big Ten is kind of one of those weird ones where it's very top heavy in one division. And this is probably where the whole divisions going away will probably benefit the Big Ten, because it is very, very top heavy when it comes to these 3 these 3 schools. Like, these 3 schools pretty much make up the Big Ten. You could probably have an argument for Iowa on the opposite division, but these teams are the teams to beat in the Big Ten, and they could either have one kind of rise up above the other 2, or they have a situation where they could all beat each other, and that would be a nightmare situation for the Big Ten, in my opinion, Because if you have an undefeated SEC team, if you have an undefeated ACC team, if you have an undefeated Pac-12 team, and you have an undefeated Big 12 team, it'd be really hard to keep those big or those other conferences out of the playoffs. So that would be a nightmare situation for the Big Ten if they have like a three-way tie between the three of them. Or another worse scenario is one of those teams drops another game outside of the three, and then they still have like a three-way tie, but then the one that lost another game, if there's somehow a way that they could make it to the championship game and then win that game, that would just spell all sorts of chaos for the Big Ten. And we might see the conference that has the most amount of potential to make the playoffs actually miss out on the playoffs just because they could lose out to each other in some way, shape, or form. That is a scenario that could happen, especially if the other conferences have have an undefeated team. The other four conferences. Big 12, Oklahoma. They're the last remaining Big 12 team undefeated right now. They're in control of their destiny. They just have to win their games, and they are in the playoffs. There would have to be a very weird situation for Oklahoma to be kept out of the playoffs this year, if they win out, of course. Now, they could very well drop a game. I mean, people keep saying that Oklahoma has a cupcake schedule, and probably for the most part, people are not wrong. However, there are some respectful teams out there, and one that's they started the season crappy, but they're actually kind of starting to find themselves, which is a little scary, at least later on in the season. Kansas is one of those that has been really good, but I mean, if they don't play their star QB, that might hinder them, and I think that might have been the difference between them beating OSU. But OSU's that other team, like that team that I just mentioned, or just not 2 seconds ago, that they started off the season kind of crappy, and then now they're kind of finding themselves, it seems like. I mean, they beat Kansas, which is amazing. Like, I didn't think anybody other than Texas and Oklahoma would be capable of doing that this year. And so OSU might actually be a team to respect highly this year, in terms of we need to not sleepwalk over them, because they could beat Oklahoma, and that's something that Oklahoma needs to be ready for. So, and it's going to be in Stillwater, so they will have home field advantage, even though it is Bedlam. So, I mean, you'll still have quite a few Oklahoma fans there. But yeah, Big 12, Oklahoma, you control your destiny. You just got to win your games. And there is a scenario where you do play Texas again, and I mean, hopefully Oklahoma has some help in that regards, because there is actually a scenario where if Texas does beat Oklahoma very close, like I'm talking 1 point or at least 1 score lead, there is a scenario where we could have Texas and Oklahoma both in the playoffs if certain things work out in that way. Like, if somehow the Big Ten, they all beat themselves, if Georgia loses a couple of games, Washington, if they lose a couple of games, if the Pac-12 kind of cannibalizes itself like people keep saying, if the ACC, if Florida State can lose to Duke, but then Duke can kind of lose some games as well, and then, North Carolina, they lose to Florida State or whoever they would play in the ACC championship. I mean, there is a scenario that could happen for Oklahoma to make the college football playoffs, both OU and Texas. So that would be kind of a weird situation, because then there's a chance that they could play each other a third time. So that'd be kind of funny, but we'll just have to wait and see on that. But who knows? And then you have a ACC, both Florida State and North Carolina. And in the regular season, those two don't have to play each other. Those two are both capable to take possession of the ACC championship trophy. That being said, Florida State, I mean, they do play Duke this next week, and that could be an upset. That could be a situation where the number 4 team goes down. And honestly, I would not mind that, because I don't think Florida State should be ahead of Oklahoma, and that would just be the way to knock them out. I think that Oklahoma should be above Florida State, and same with Washington. I think both teams should be ahead of Florida State, but that's my opinion. But that would be one way to iron out the whole situation of undefeated conference teams. However, we would still have to worry about North Carolina at that point, but I don't think anybody respects North Carolina above Oklahoma, at least not yet. That could change, especially if North Carolina does run the table and beats whoever they play in the ACC championship game. But I like seeing these teams kind of filter out as the weeks go. So, I mean, who knows? We might see North Carolina be the ACC winner, and that would be probably a shock to a lot of people, and we'll see what happens there. But, I mean, and it could be that Liberty and James Madison and even Air Force, it could be that they lose a game at some point. And then at that point, we don't have to worry about them. We don't have to worry about them being ranked. But the fact that they are undefeated, I feel like they deserve a spot at least somewhere, even if it's 24 or 25. But that's kind of where I'm at with that. With the undefeated teams, that is kind of their path to the playoffs, really. And there's multiple situations that could happen, different orders that which you can put them in. It's hard to tell which conferences are the better conferences and which ones are the worst. If there was a tie, if let's say the scenario is Florida State's undefeated, Oklahoma's undefeated, Ohio State is undefeated, and Georgia's undefeated, and Washington's undefeated. Let's say that scenario happens where all 5 of the leaders of each conference goes undefeated, and I put Ohio State over Michigan because I think that they have a better resume, at least right now. So I like Ohio State over Michigan right now. I think that there is a possibility that the ACC would be the conference to be left out. I think the Big 12, I think it's kind of a toss up between the Big 12 and the ACC. And I think it will really kind of revolve around Oklahoma's win against Texas, who beat Alabama. I think Alabama just gets a ridiculous amount of respect in everybody's eyes, especially if they keep winning their games and win out. People are going to really respect the Texas win over Alabama and the Oklahoma win over Texas. And I think that will carry a lot more weight than what the ACC winner would ever have this season. And so I think if we had a 5-way tie between the Power 5 schools in terms of undefeated teams, I think that the ACC would probably be the conference to be left out, if that scenario happens. And that's assuming that all of these schools go undefeated, of course. Now, if Oklahoma drops a game, obviously then they would have control. The ACC would have control over the Big 12 at that point. So that very well could happen. But that's kind of where I see it. That's kind of how I view these undefeated teams. I think that any one of them could run the table. I think that the conference title is up for grabs this year. I don't think that any one of these teams is noticeably above the rest. I think that any one of them can win. I would really love to see Oklahoma and Washington play for the national championship game. I think that those are both two capable teams to win it all. So I really like those two teams. I think those two teams have been the more consistent of all of them, who have played teams that, you know, they both have the better quality wins of all of the rest of these conferences, for sure, hands down, at least at the current point of the season. So anyways, I'm rambling on in that segment. Now we're gonna get to the my top 10 list of teams. So let me find that broadcast here. Let's see. Got to get things prepped here. So turn that off, turn that on. All right. So we talked about the AP poll. We talked about the undefeated teams that are remaining in the season, and we'll kind of keep up with the undefeated teams as the season progresses, and kind of cross out the ones that lose going forward, and then we'll kind of start eliminating teams at that point. But yeah, no, I think that any one of those teams kind of controls their destiny. The only ones that need a lot of help, and I mean a lot of help, unfortunately, is James Madison, Air Force, and Liberty. But yeah, any one of those undefeated teams could totally make it. But moving on to my top 10. So there's not gonna be a ridiculous amount of movement. There are some teams that did get pushed out of my top 10 from last week. Louisville, of course, is one of them. Unfortunately, they got me hyped up about them with the win against Notre Dame, but then couldn't get the job done against Pitt. It's so funny how that works sometimes. But that's kind of how things roll sometimes, is you get a win and you're high on that win, and then you kind of fail to stay focused, and you start to make mistakes. But that's just the nature of everything. All right, so my top 10 list. I think you're going to start to see a pattern in my top 10, and it does revolve around the undefeated teams, at least the Power 5 undefeated teams. You're going to see a pattern there, probably in the weeks to come, as long as these teams remain undefeated. I'm literally going to have one team from each Power 5 conference who's undefeated be in the slots 1 through 5. Now, if any of those teams lose at any point, then you'll start to see two teams from the same conference probably start to make their way into my top 5. But until any of those teams lose, any of those conference teams loses out, I'm gonna have all 5 of those slots will be, or I guess I should point this way. All 5 of these slots here will be reserved for the Power 5 schools in one school. So you're gonna see some Big Ten teams. I mean, that's like the big one that is in the top 3. There's two Big Ten teams in the top 3 of the AP poll, and that's where I have a huge problem. But anyways, I'm kind of beating around the bush. Here's my number 10 in Penn State, and the Nittany Lions. I like where they're at. I like what I've seen. They're starting to gain a lot more respect. Last week I didn't have them on this top 10 because I didn't really like having 3 Big Ten schools in my top 10. I wanted to give other undefeated teams, the limelight for a little bit, and that was Louisville. Louisville took that spot last week, and not necessarily the number 10 spot, but they were in the top 10. But Penn State is the one to steal that spot from them because of they just continue to win, and they will definitely have an opportunity to steal a spot in my top 5 if they beat Ohio State this next week. So I like Penn State at number 10. I think that is a a very respectful spot, especially in the midway point. They have every opportunity like to control their destiny if they win out. So I don't have a problem with that at all. So moving on. So it is kind of crazy that I do have a number or a one-loss team. Oh, and I totally forgot to transition. My bad. Number 9, Oregon. There it's kind of, I hate putting one-loss teams ahead of undefeated teams. However, I don't like once again, I don't like having three Big Ten teams in my top 10, but I can't deny that they have 3 that are undefeated currently, so I have to put them in there, but I will put Oregon ahead of one of those Big Ten schools to give the other conferences some love. And I honestly think Oregon, if Oregon were to play Penn State, I think Oregon would beat Penn State. I think that they're a better team, and honestly, they could have very well beaten Washington. And you know, if you watched my last top 10 video, you saw that I had Oregon at number 1. So I think number 9 is a solid spot, and don't pay too much attention to how much I have them drop after losing to another solid Pac-12 team. I just, because they have 1 loss and there are other undefeated teams, I have them drop from number 1 to number 9 because I value each one of those top 5 spots for each conference. So that is why they drop so much in my ranking after a 1 loss. It's not because I think that Oregon is that bad. I think that they're good, but I have there's already a limited number of spots in the playoffs, so I'm going to reward the other conferences. So that is why they went from number 1 to number 9. So that's all I have to really say about them. They did really well against Washington, and they just couldn't finish. And unfortunately, the team that had the ball last for most, like with enough time to really have a true shot at winning, it happened to be Washington in that game. So I still really like Oregon. I think that they are still pretty in control of their destiny if they win out and kind of avenge that loss in a Pac-12 championship game. So I don't have a problem with them being at 9 right now. Coming at number 8, we have Texas. So let's see. I don't even remember where I had Texas, honestly, last week. They might have jumped up a spot or 2. I think I had them at 10. So I think I did. I gave them 2 spots from last week, but that's really mainly because Oregon lost and Louisville lost. So if Louisville didn't lose, I would have probably kept Texas at least to 9. But because Louisville lost, they naturally get the benefit of the doubt and they naturally move up in the rankings. So it is what it is. But that's Texas for you. They had a bye week this week, but because other teams lost, they naturally get to move up. Then you have North Carolina at number 7. Mac Brown, he's got his team pretty solid. Like, they have a legitimate shot at making the playoffs this year if they can win out the rest of their games. If they can beat Florida State in the ACC championship game, if both teams make it to the ACC championship game, they very well could find themselves in the playoffs. So I don't have a problem with them being in number 7. They could literally be at any one of these spots, and if they win out, they would be in this side somewhere. So I don't have a problem with them being at number 7, but not much more I can say about them right now. Then you have Michigan coming at number 6. Once again, like last week, I said that I need to see more from Michigan in regards to how they do against Penn State and how they do against Ohio State. Until they can play those two teams, I'm not going to respect them at all. I mean, I respect them a little bit enough to put them at number 6, so they're like the second team outside looking in on this list. But I think that Michigan's schedule is just too weak, and I think that Ohio State has a much better record than them. And not necessarily record, but better resume, I should say, with the win against Notre Dame. Even though Notre Dame is not that great, they're 2-loss Notre Dame, and they beat a USC team who will most likely win more games. I know I'm projecting a little bit into the future with that one, but I just don't see USC winning very many more games after this week, and I think that they're on a downward trajectory. So yeah, maybe Ohio State's win is going to look less and less impressive as far as the Big Ten. But until Michigan can play somebody that's better than Notre Dame, I'm going to keep Ohio State ahead of Michigan and Penn State even. And that's another thing. If Penn State beats Ohio State this week, I would probably I would have Penn State jump Ohio State. So that's the scenario that could happen. So until Michigan can play one of those two teams and beat them, I'm going to have Michigan at number 6. That's just the way it's going to be for me. I just don't think that they have enough of a good resume to justify putting them in the top 5 just yet. But coming at number 5, Florida State. I think this is where I had them last week, and this is where I'm going to have them this week. I don't see Florida State. I don't see the ACC having a good enough win to be above the other 4 teams. And that's why I think Florida State, they kind of need a little bit of help from the other 4 conferences. I think that Oklahoma has the better win against Florida State in anybody that they play on their schedule. So that's why I would have the Big 12 undefeated team over the ACC undefeated team, just because I think that there is a better win. So let me just go ahead and reveal Oklahoma, because that is my number 4 spot. Like, as much as I am a big fan of Oklahoma, as much as I'm a big fan of the Big 12, at least for one more year, it's so sad to see the Big 12 kind of just deflate. I mean, the fact that the 2 teams who are going to be leaving the conference are the only 2 teams that are 0 to 1 loss teams is really sad. Like, the fact that everybody else has at least 2 losses or more is very sad for that conference. And so they're not much better than the ACC right now. But it's really just the fact that Texas beat Alabama and Oklahoma beat Texas that really gives the Big 12, I keep pointing over here, gives the Big 12 the win over the ACC in this regard. So that's why I have them in that order. But really, at the end of the day, the likelihood that any one of these top 4 teams has a loss is possible. I mean, it's going to be hard. It'll be impressive if all 4 of these conferences go undefeated. And so, like, I think Florida State, they still have control over their destiny. It's just going to be they need a little bit of help, in my opinion. But we'll see what happens there. Then at number 3, and this is probably where I'm going to lose a lot of people. I actually dropped Georgia another spot from last week. Yes, their win against Kentucky was impressive, but then this week Kentucky lost again. They lost a second time within 2 weeks. And so that makes Georgia's win less impressive. And Georgia struggled against arguably the worst SEC school, at least in the history of the conference, with Vanderbilt. They kind of didn't take them seriously or something. They were not playing dominant against a team that they should have destroyed. I'm going to penalize Georgia for that. And, you know, at the end of the day, at least they're in the my top four. And so it doesn't really matter where they end up as long as they're in the playoff. Like, I could easily put them at 4. Especially if Oklahoma wins out. If Oklahoma wins out and Georgia barely squeaks by their schedule, I do not have a problem with putting Georgia at number 4. I would actually put Oklahoma over Georgia. But they have every opportunity to prove me wrong. If they come out the rest of their season and just dominate like they would, then I would start to respect them more to put them in the top 2 to 1. So Georgia, you're finding yourself getting lower and lower in terms of my opinion about you. However, you still got a chance to prove yourself. And that's, I mean, I will never take you out of the top 4. Hear me say that. I will never take you out of the top 4 unless you lose. You lose a game, I'm taking you out. You're out of there. So that's how I see it, and that's how I view Georgia this year, and really the SEC as a whole. Like, I think that SEC is probably one of the worst. They're probably the 3rd worst, and that's why I have them at number 3. Really. So, I mean, I know, I get it. They're the 2-time defending national champs, but at the end of the day, I don't care what you did last year. I don't care what you did the year before. This is a new season. All the statistics get reset for this year, except for individual player stats. Those, of course, carry over. But all the team stats, that resets to 0 each year. So that's why I'm going to be a little bit more harsh for you guys, but you will always be in the top 4 if you keep winning. All right, let's get this thing wrapped up. We're kind of going on to like an hour and a half, I think. I have Ohio State at number 2. I think that Ohio State is the better Big Ten team. I think that they continue to grow as the season progresses. You know, they kind of started out a little slow, but like I said last week, I like where the trajectory that they're heading in. I see it. I can see a team that will be playoff ready by the end of the season. Now, they could prove me wrong by losing to Ohio State. They could prove me wrong by losing to Penn State this next week. If Penn State can come out and beat Ohio State, all right, that will kind of settle that. And I will definitely swap places. Penn State will go to Ohio State, and Ohio State will go to Penn State. But I think that Penn State has an opportunity to steal that position. But at the end of the day, at least before that game is played, I think Ohio State is the better team. And so I'm going to keep them there at number 2. I think that's a fair spot for them for right now. And then once, like I already mentioned how I feel about Michigan, so I'm not even going to go into that. So that's why I have Ohio State at 2. And I think that they're looking a little bit more like a complete team compared to Georgia. And that's why I have them jumping Georgia this week. And then you have my number 1 team. And I will have to say this because I did say in the AP reaction how much I couldn't stand having Washington ahead of Oklahoma in the AP poll. But in my version, I don't have to worry too much because I look at each Power 5 team, school or conference and determine the rankings by that. And so I'm not going to have the same team from the same, or I'm not going to have two teams from the same conference ahead of every other conference at this point in the season. So I feel like I'm okay with Washington being ahead of Oklahoma in this poll, because at least Oklahoma has a chance to prove themselves. You know, in the current poll, if the playoffs happen today, Oklahoma would be left out of the playoffs. And technically Washington would be too, but it'd be really irritating that Oklahoma gets moved to number 6 when they were previously at 5. And according to number 8 and number 9, which I think that's actually the same as the AP poll, those teams are in the same exact order, yet somehow they value Washington's win over Oregon over Oklahoma's win over Texas. And that's like because of how limited the spots are, and because of the fact that there's two Big Ten teams in those 2 spots, I'm a little annoyed that Oklahoma moves down a rank. And that's why I was more annoyed with Washington being over Oklahoma. But in a situation where both teams can be in a playoff spot, I don't care if Washington is over Oklahoma. So that's why I have it in that situation with my poll, and why I'm upset about the AP poll being the way it is. So I mean, that's the nature of that. But that's kind of what I see it, or that's where I see it at the current point of this season. However, I really like Washington and Oklahoma this year. And I'm really hoping Oklahoma comes out dominant the rest of the season. If Oklahoma, I'm not saying that they will even go undefeated, but let's say they do. Let's say that the Oklahoma runs the table, and including beating Texas, number 8 Texas. At least my number 8 Texas, and maybe even the AP polls Texas. If Oklahoma can be dominant in the rest of their season, if they can go and just beat the brakes off of UCF, just destroy Kansas, beat OSU convincingly, BYU, West Virginia, TCU, I think those are all the remaining teams. And then if Oklahoma does play Texas again, I would love to see Washington and Oklahoma being number 1 and number 2. And here's why. I think that would be an excellent matchup in the national championship game. I think that would be a great matchup. Obviously, in this current situation, I would have them playing in the semifinals. But I'm kind of hoping when it's all said and done, if Oklahoma can run the table, and even Washington, they would have to do the same, of course. I would love it if Washington was number 1 and Oklahoma was number 2. Or you can have it in the other way too is fine. But I think it'd be great if maybe Oklahoma could have a rematch against Georgia, maybe in the semifinals, and then Ohio State could play Washington. And then it'd be great if Washington and Oklahoma both win their semifinals. And then if Oklahoma could then, of course, as an Oklahoma fan, win out and win the national championship game. That is a scenario I would love to see. But I don't know. We'll see what happens. It could be that Washington gets or loses a game or 2 to knock them out. It could be Oklahoma. They knock themselves out in some way, shape, or form. We'll just have to wait and see. But that is where at this point of the season, that is where I would rank the teams, and I'm going to continue to do it this formula right here. Mainly my top 5. Like, this column doesn't matter a whole lot, because if like, say, Penn State beats Ohio State, then Penn State would then replace Ohio State. If, let's say, in the Big 12 championship game, I would probably, and assuming that Florida State goes undefeated, I would probably put Texas at number 5, and then put like Florida State to number 4. At that point, because like that's how interchangeable my ranking would be, in terms of, okay, on all the, like, if, like, let's say, I'm trying to get my bearings right. Let's say that North Carolina beats Florida State in the ACC championship game. I would put North Carolina at number 5 if these other 4 teams remain undefeated. Or if Michigan, I'm like figuring this out, if Michigan beats Ohio State, and of course beats Penn State, I would have Michigan at number 2. And maybe even number 1. If Michigan can beat Penn State and Ohio State, and also be, of course, the conference winner, I could probably put Michigan over Washington at that point. But even then, Washington has a really solid schedule that they have to contend with. So I don't know. That's kind of, I'm rambling at this point and going over possible scenarios, but not necessarily likely scenarios, but possible scenarios. I don't know. We'll see how the rest of the season goes, but I think that these teams are set up nicely if they can just win out, and they will be fascinating to see how this thing ends up. So, all that to say, I hope you guys enjoyed this little ramble. I really enjoy this kind of stuff. I really, like, I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to rankings and that sort of thing. And I did cancel my wolf poll. It was a lot of work. I'm gonna just admit that it was a lot of work, and I definitely gave up on it. I was also getting really frustrated with ESPN and how they have not been consistent with their stats, and it's kind of affecting my stats negatively. And I will revisit it. It's not the end of this poll, and plus that's another situation. It catered to good offensive teams and not good defensive teams. So next year I'm going to try to find ways of automating the information. So all I have to do is click a button and it will automatically fill in the information for me. It'll get the information from ESPN or probably, hopefully, better sources, and that way it's automated. But I am definitely canceling that, because that is just a ridiculous amount of work. And I just need to get it automated before I use it. So, and I need to add more criteria for it. So anyways, once again, I'm rambling. I do apologize. And I'm getting tired, noticeably tired. So, yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I crammed a lot in this, but I had a lot to talk about. I mean, especially with Oklahoma not playing this week, I had a lot of time to really think about things, and of course go over the AP poll, and then kind of revisit all the undefeated teams, and then of course my own kind of eye test top 10 of where I think teams should be ranked, and how I think that it should go. And I'm only going to do top 10. Trying to figure out the top 25 would be just a ridiculous amount of work that doesn't really matter. I think what really truly matters is your top 10. Those are your true playoff contending teams. Anybody below that they have a shot, but it's getting a lot less likely, especially the closer we get to the end. So that is why I will only focus on the top 10 with my particular top 10 list. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys in the next one. It'll be a preview to Oklahoma versus UCF. I will go over kind of my expectations, things like that, and that will probably be on Thursday. At least that's when I plan on uploading or, streaming it. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.